You're watching the Watercooler Forum, a safe space for free public policy discussion, brought to you by the Menzies Research Centre. I'm Nick Cater, Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, broadcasting from a sad and sorry Sydney CBD. Business activity in the CBD isn't everything. We have vibrant suburban and regional economies too, but the amount of traffic in our metropolitan city centres gives us a measure of the punishment we've been dishing out to our economies. South Australia has 648 cases and 4 deaths since the start of 2020, but just look at the impact on the Adelaide CBD. Traffic in July is less than half of pre-crisis levels. Tasmania, 234 cases and 13 deaths, and activity in the Hobart CBD is barely a third of pre-pandemic levels. In WA there's a similar pattern, 9 deaths, and the Perth CBD movement is down to 41% of pre-COVID levels. In Brisbane, capital of a state with 1,800 cases and 7 deaths, movement levels are 35% of what they were early last year. Now the big ones, Victoria with 20,948 cases and 820 deaths. Movement in the Melbourne CBD is 16% of pre-pandemic levels. And finally, Sydney, 9,163 cases, 68 deaths, and the epicentre of the Delta variant resurgence. Movement in the CBD is just 10% of what we used to think of as the old normal. Well, on tonight's forum, we'll be looking at the consequences of applying the brakes to economic activity for our prosperity and our well-being. The health benefits are clear, at least we think they are, but what will be the price of this extended period of social and economic distancing? And how long can we keep starting economic activity before something gives? On Watercooler Forum tonight, I'm joined from Melbourne by Tamsin Lawrence from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Bruce Keebaugh from the Big Group, Australia's largest privately owned catering and events company, and Jason Falinski, federal member for the seat of Mackellar, which includes Sydney's northern beaches. Thank you all for joining me. Bruce, I might dive right into you at the coalface, as it were. Just tell me how your business has been surviving this stop-start lockdown.
Well, surviving is an interesting place to start discussing it. I think we're up to about day 375, something like that, since this COVID pandemic really hit Australia. And the restaurant, catering, major event sector has had about 300 days of either formal lockdown or what I sort of call restraint of trade via the restrictions that come, as part of the lockdown. So that's a lot less days not working than those days working. So the survival piece, to me, gets factored in a few different sectors. One is about the health and well-being of our people, and our culture of the business. Part of it is about the financial impact of how we go through there. And then part of it is about the client management and our own brand management there within. So it's a pretty large strategy piece that we keep playing with. And but currently we are surviving and we're still trying to keep our smiles on our dials. So that's sort of where we're at. But it's a challenge, I can assure you.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you still smiling. Tamsin, you take a broader view, of course, at the Chamber of Commerce. You're looking at businesses large, medium and small across the country. What's the picture from where you sit?
I'd say it's a pretty tired picture. I think that particularly on the eastern seaboard, it's been a long 12 months. You look at states like Victoria, they've been locked down, even without the restraints on trade, as Bruce points out, for in excess of 6 months now. And businesses they want a pathway out, and they want certainty. And I think the problem is each time there's a lockdown, there's different rules, there's different people who are in and out of whether they're essential or non-essential, and it's that confusion that just adds to people's stress and anxiety and worry about, is this worth me continuing to pursue? And I think we all know why it's so important that businesses do stick around and keep employing, but we need to give them a reason to stay around at the moment, I think.
And Jason, to you in Mackellar, in Sydney's north, business, I know, is not slow to pick up the phone to their local MP when there's a problem. How's your phone been? Has it been ringing hot?
Yeah, Nick, it's been ringing pretty hot. I mean, to be fair, they kind of had a taste of this over Christmas and New Year, so they knew what was coming. And yeah, they've made it quite clear that this is really tough. But to Tamsin and Bruce's point, I mean, this isn't just about the financial impact. This is about the mental impact of people having the will and the creativity and the energy to keep going. And I think they're finding this time around, it's sucking them dry for the final time.
There are many facets to this, of course, Bruce, but let's try and deal with them one by one. First of all, staff. You've got this peculiar problem where we're having to pay staff to sit on the couch or look for money from the government, hopefully, to do that. But at the same time, when business is open, particularly in your sector, we hear of staff shortages. There just aren't enough people to work. What's going on?
Well, it's a conundrum, really, I suppose. I mean, the JobKeeper piece in the very beginning of this, where we go back to lockdown 1, and once again, I'm looking at it from a Melbourne, Victoria lens, was a really great tool for businesses like my own. We had 1,400 staff, which we stood down immediately. And then once JobKeeper came into the equation, it allowed us to have a labour force. So we could continue, we could keep people in their roles. And it allowed us also to, as we came out of lockdown, to be able to re-skill them back up into their roles. So it was a very positive thing. These lockdowns in February and then the ones that the lockdown 4 and 5 have been far more difficult on business and especially on small businesses because they do not and did not have any support for those wages. That said, if we just put that to the side for a minute, the apathy that the JobKeeper program caused was very difficult, especially for the casual sector where they were getting $750 a week, where previously they might have been doing a couple of shifts in hospitality and earned a couple of $100s. So we've had this problem inside there where it is difficult to get staff. That is another issue. But then I think the piece that's probably the most important with regards to the skill shift and now the labour shortage within the hospitality sector is more to do with the fear. So currently, you know, if you had a choice of to what industry you might want to work in, hospitality, major events, business events, weddings, etc., are all very, tenuous. You know, you don't really know that you're going to have job security there. What is the executive pathing going to look like for you within that field? So we've had a massive amount of people who've left the industry by choice. They've left the industry due to not having roles. So that is going to be our greatest challenge moving forward, to one, rebrand our industry and get back to what it used to be, which was where there was great energy, excitement and, fun, it was sort of the fun bit of business. And then we need to attract the right talent back, but that is going to take quite a while. So we've got some big challenges ahead.
So there's a permanent effect here, Bruce. You're not just going to simply bounce back if you're losing staff from the industry completely.
I kind of like using examples of other industries. So if we were talking construction, for example, which has been able to trade all the way through in every lockdown in Victoria anyway, the wages were kept the same. People were, able to look after their family, pay their mortgage, keep food on their table. If we look at the hospitality industry, we've sort of been vilified as the super spreaders. We've been the first to shut down and the last to reopen at every age and stage. So, if we took construction and we pulled out 30 to 40% of that workforce, Australia would be able to stop. We would not be able to fill our infrastructure. We would not be able to continue moving forward. And that is what's currently happening to the hospitality sector, albeit considered sort of light and frivolous. We still inject about $35 billion into the economy nationally.
Well, let's stick with construction. Anybody who's been in Sydney for the last couple of weeks will notice this real strange eerie silence when you step outside. We're not used to that. There's been so much construction going on for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It feels like Christmas Day out there. It's so quiet. You expect to hear Hark the Herald Angels sing or something. Tamsin, look, but on a serious note, I mean, look, when you walk around, you see these massive cranes, for instance, just sitting there idle, and it brings home to you that there are tremendous fixed costs in the construction industry. You can't just simply sort of stop paying for the crane or stop paying for everything else you need when you're running a construction site. Can you tell me what are the insights you're getting from that sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's not an industry which works on small margins. It's an industry that has a lot of leasing involved, has a lot of long timelines, and shutting down that industry, we've never seen it before. And I think that we're going to see on the other side why we've never shut it down before anywhere around the country, because the flow-on impacts, the slow restart that they have, and the amount of businesses that it can kill very quickly by shutting it down. I had companies that we spoke to who, for example, in the industry where they would lease out crane ladders, like the kind of things that you use to go up multiple levels on a building site. And the amount of money that they had to pay back in the leasing arrangements that they had for their equipment across sites that weren't being utilised killed them in the first week. So they basically said this is for a business that had been operating in excess of 20 years, never done anything wrong, never missed a bill. 1 week worth of being shut down killed them because they can't possibly pay the lease repayments that they have. And there's no government assistance that helps you with leasing out an asset. So I think that, it's, in one hand, I understand Bruce's sentiments with regards to his industry, and I have complete and utter sympathy for hospitality and restaurants. They have copped this more than, frankly, any other industry. But I think we need to think about, when we do shut down something like construction, the flow-on implications that has. Because in a state like Victoria, they are the biggest employers in this state. And I'm sure it's a similar data around New South Wales. And we may see some projects that, frankly, either cost the taxpayer significantly more, or projects that just never recommence, because people don't understand that it's not just a snap back. It's not like they can just open the construction site the next day. That's not how it works. It's quite a significant lead time. There's quite a lot of safety concerns around these industries. And so the decision to shut them down shouldn't be something that's done lightly. They've proven in Victoria that they can stay open, and they can stay open safely. And it's a shame that they weren't given the same opportunity in New South Wales.
That said, Tamsin, I'm sorry just to jump in on that though, but the thing with construction, apropos to hospitality, and yes, you're right, we have done it the hardest, but we have an intangible product. So starting up an events business has a long lead time as well. The costs, of course, we have lease lines; they're part of just business operation. But the intangibility of the product for all these suppliers, from the cake lady from Mackellar to the largest caterer in the country, we're just throwing out bins and bins loads of food. Construction at least has a product that they can keep on moving and they can keep on working. What we found frustrating down here was, work sites would have 400, 500, 600 men on a site, and they would just continue working. And there wasn't sort of any negotiation or discussion with business to say that, okay, IKEA can have 4,000 people walking through the retail sector, construction can have 700 people on the site, but there are these other industries that are permanently shut. So that was the thing. Not all industries are the same.
No, I completely concur. And I think this is the problem of the hypocrisy of decisions that you see out of governments. I think we've all heard the example of the fact you can't go visit your grandma, but you can go to a strip club. Now, I think everybody hears that and says that just can't be. That doesn't pass the pub test. And I think, Bruce, the points you point out, the exact same thing. We see this hypocrisy in the way that the government is applying the laws and applying the restrictions of who's essential and who's not. Well, frankly, everyone's essential. If it's, money and income that they make that pays their families, that puts the food on the table, that helps send their kids to school. Why are we suddenly distinguishing between who's essential and who's not? Everybody's job and every business in this country is essential.
Yeah, Jason, I might take that up with you. I remember the Prime Minister, I thought very courageously and wisely said at the start of this crisis that he wasn't going to nominate what is an essential business, because every job was an essential job. Do we still hold by that on the coalition side of politics, and how does that fit with, say, the closure of construction?
Well, absolutely. And I think the broader point to what Tamsin's making is that, on our side of politics, we believe in maximising the freedom of the individual, because no matter, we, as Nick, in federal parliament, we are the smartest, the best and the brightest people that Australia has. And not only do we know more than the rest of you, we demonstrate that every single day of the week. But even us, even the collective genius of all of us in federal parliament, cannot conceive of all the circumstances, all the things that different people need to do in different places at all times. And it goes back to Hayek's point about why centralised decision-making doesn't work. And if this pandemic and these lockdowns have shown everything, is exactly what Tamsin's saying. which is leave it up to a bunch of politicians or bureaucrats to determine who it is and isn't safe to come up with. We are naturally going to come up with the strip club is, that's a special circumstances that you should allow, but meeting grandma, that could be very dangerous. And that's why these decisions, to the best of our capacity and to the greatest amount of possibility, should be left up to individuals to decide. So in this lockdown, Bruce is absolutely right. Why is it okay for 4,000 people to walk through our IKEA and not for Bruce to, in a limited sense, have a restaurant open or allow takeaway, or all the sorts of things that we should allow? When you allow government to gather more and more responsibility and authority to itself and centralise that, you get these bizarre, weird and less than wonderful decisions being made. And if at the end of this, when we can all, relax and take a deep breath, that is the one lesson that should come out of this. And I think is a critical lesson that we're learning. I mean, we have a situation in New South Wales. We have Omar Kashari, who is the president of the AMA, refusing to criticise a doctor in southwest Sydney who was charging $250 for giving away a vaccine that is free, that the federal government is paying them to administer, but at the same time, telling everyone in Sydney they should be wearing masks outside. Now, let me ask you this question, Nick. Do you know how many examples or how many instances there have been of COVID being transmitted outdoors?
I think it's 0, isn't it, Jason?
Zero. But the head of the AMA can't find the time to criticise a doctor for charging vulnerable patients $250, but feels that every person in Sydney should have to wear a mask outdoors. This is the absurdity of giving petty-minded bureaucrats too much power.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's an interesting conversation. I mean, if I look back on, the past 18 months, I mean, one of the, I think, very interesting learnings for Australia, and look, we're a really small country with a massive landmass, so 26 million people, it's sort of nothing. We wouldn't even fit into the half of boot of the California. But federation is a huge problem because, we have an elected government that's supposed to be, overseeing the entire thing. And then we've got 7 different disciplines going on. So we've got 7 different chief health officers or, however many we've got. And so there's this repetition of things. So if you run a national business, you've got all these different protocols in order to get through what is actually a national crisis and should have been seen. So that should have been one decision-making body, not this huge amount of power in all these states. It doesn't make sense.
We've shown the weakness of federation well and truly, as well as the weakness of central planning. I mean, everything Hayek said was right, Jason. But does this show that we should have acted sooner to try and straighten out the federation, or is it just the way it is? Is it just we were bequeathed this wonderful Commonwealth and Constitution more than 100 years ago? We just got to live with it.
No, we're the ones who've stuffed it up. Let's be very clear. The Constitution as written, and there's an excellent article by Adam Crichton about in the US. And it gives a great example of North Dakota and South Dakota. So in South Dakota, you've had virtually no restrictions. In North Dakota, you've had the People's Republic, Socialist Republic of North Dakota. The result in terms of health outcomes has been basically the same, but business has been able to keep going and survive in South Dakota. And of course, the other great example he has is the difference between California and Florida. Australia has absolutely stuffed up its federation by firstly allowing the federal government to take all the taxing powers. So the states continue to deliver all the services, but the federal government has to pay for it. And it's the same taxpayer at the end of the day. But the result is at every state election, we're going to spend more on health, regardless of how useful, productive or efficient that spending is, because the federal government pays for it. And at every federal election, we talk about, we're going to cut your taxes. It's absurd where we get. And of course, we have a situation in New South Wales, which I think on any reasonable understanding of the situation is that we had health orders not being enforced by a limo driver, then in the eastern suburbs, that then leaked out. We still have compliance problems in southwest Sydney, but everyone's blaming, you guessed it, the vaccine rollout. So that, I think, is a result of where you just have this misalignment of roles and responsibilities that is not envisaged in the Constitution. And the great work, I think, of this generation has to be to reintroduce, to reaffirm a competitive federation in Australia.
Tamsin, I guess as a lawyer, you'd endorse that view of the federation. But look, let's get at the start of this crisis. We did some modelling. We did the best modelling we can as to what the economic outcome would be. We tested 3 scenarios: a hard lockdown and then opening up, leaving the economy as it was, or a stop-start lockdown as the virus rose its ugly head. And of course, the modelling showed that the worst outcome would be the stop-start, because business loses the certainty it requires and supply chains get disrupted, etc., etc. That's what we've ended up with, isn't it, Tamsin? Could we have done it differently?
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more that we've ended up with perhaps one of the worst outcomes. I think perhaps in Victoria, the worst, going through 5 lockdowns already. And I think it's just the uncertainty and the emotional taxing outcomes of constantly locking down. Businesses get hope, they reopen, they get bookings, and then bang, they're locked down again. I think Victoria, we were open for 3, maybe 4 weeks before we went from lockdown 4 to lockdown 5. Now, I think anybody, whether you run a business, you don't, or whether you're just an employer, you understand what a horrible emotional toll that has on people and how drained business owners are, particularly on the eastern seaboard. Now, could we have done this better? Could we have rolled out the vaccine differently? Could we have done X, Y, Z? Could we have, built a nice centre where we could quarantine everyone in the middle of the desert? I don't know. I think for business at the moment, there's no point looking back and saying what could have been. It's all about now looking forward and saying, well, what can we do better next time we lock down? What can we do better so that we don't have situations where we're having to learn the difference now between JobKeeper and the COVID relief disaster payment? That's a totally different scheme. Very different to now understand whether your employee was eligible and whether they're not now. Same with the essential worker list. Like, why does that change every lockdown in every different state? That kind of stuff doesn't need to be difficult for business, but it's being made difficult, where they shouldn't have to call up and find out the answer to this and speak to their lawyer and speak to their accountant to find out. It should just be, if you're going to lock down, because that seems to be the prerogative of our state premiers at this time, have a consistent approach at least, so that businesses know what they can do, what they can't, what employees in, what employees out, and when it will end. Because there's nothing worse than locking down and thinking, I actually don't know when this is going to come up at the other end, because frankly, a lot of businesses decide, I can't wait and I'm just going to shut my door. And that's the worst outcome we can possibly have in the current scenario.
Bruce, stop-start, how's that been working for your business?
Oh, it's an absolute unmitigated disaster. Tamsin's absolutely correct. I mean, one part of it, as we started on from the very beginning, is the mental health fatigue, which is there. The output of the job insecurity is leading to, anger, anguish, depression. I probably would get 3 to 4 calls a week from various families inside the hospitality industry who've lost, a young son or a partner to suicide. So our suicide rates, whether they want to admit it or not, are going through the roof. So that's just an absolute horror, which is the outcome. And then the financial piece of starting and stopping is, just exhausting. So, you're building up a business, you do have hope, you think, or maybe we'll get there. At the moment, we're sitting on a very pivotal moment in time for the events industry. Like, we'll either get AFL, racing, cricket and the Australian Open up, or will we build it, and we're not talking $10 here to build it, we're talking tens of millions of dollars to build these events, and maybe there's no people there. So without government-backed insurance, without the people behind providing some solutions to business, stopping and starting becomes more and more arduous, and it gets to a point where you think, honestly, I myself should not reinvest. I should not keep employing people. So that's a very dangerous spot for an economy to be in, because you actually need people to take risk and to be entrepreneurial to make a great, environment for business.
That's right, Bruce. And this leads on to this point of what we were talking about last week in the restaurant and catering trade, particularly vulnerable businesses. I don't know about yours, but typically a restaurant and catering business would not have a lot of assets. They generally lease their premises. They generally run on cash flow. They're not able to build up large stocks of capital for a rainy day. these aren't bad businesses. They're very good businesses. They put out great products. They make really good. They're really strong at innovation. All those things, but they're the ones that are vulnerable, right?
They're out of cash. They're out of working capital. They're running these businesses, a lot of them, from month to month. The margins aren't great in your general hospitality business. Some of them are, sometimes they're lifestyle businesses. That's actually their wage that's coming through that business. But then back to Tamsin's point, the support was quite clear. When we had JobKeeper in the beginning, it was sort of understandable. The employers were in charge of the system, and so we could oversee how it worked. But now we've got all these multiple disaster relief funds and this fund and that fund. They are so difficult. All I hear back from small business owners is, we should be eligible. We're not eligible. We put in our form for this one. It's now 4 months later. I still don't have the funds. They are so cash poor that literally waiting 30, 60 and 90 days for a government support fund is a disaster. So it's certainly not rolling as smoothly as I'm sure perhaps it could have.
Jason, I don't want to sit here as backseat drivers for the Premier of New South Wales. She's got a difficult job. She has to make these hard decisions, often based on imperfect information. But if you, in your text to her, what would you be saying right now? What advice would you be giving her to keep the community safe, while at the same time stopping businesses getting run into the ground?
Well, I think I would be saying what she was saying, which is, make these lockdowns as localised and as short as possible. Focus more on isolating people in exposure sites or casual contacts, and focus on the nuance of every number. So you have areas where it looks like, we've got 23, 24 cases, but when you look behind the numbers, every single one of them was a household contact. Every single one of them was isolating while infectious. So that should give you comfort and knowledge to actually open a lot of those areas. So that they're areas, Nick, like the Central Coast, Blue Mountains, Shell Harbour, most of it, I have to say, of the northern suburbs of Sydney, including northwest Sydney. I mean, we should be seeking to maximise freedom. If the point of these lockdowns is to suppress the virus, not to suppress people, then where there's no virus, why are we continuing with the lockdowns?
Very easy to say, though, Jason. Like, once again, I'm in a business that's probably been affected the most, in this country. But it's very tricky, because I often try to put myself in the lens of if I was the decision maker, and Gladys, to her, I think she did a brilliant job, and she really was pro-business, and she supported, and she probably hung on later than perhaps she should have. And thus the outbreak that's there now would be bearing a massive personal guilt. On the flip, if you look at the Labor government down here, they were very strict on the lockdowns. And that was, it's about having someone on your board who is totally risk adverse due to what happened. I mean, if we take those 800 deaths from aged care and let's just pretend they hadn't happened, I think that would be a very different lens as to how they would have done their decision making, because they're so risk adverse now due to that, that moral compass that you would have from making your decision. So it's such a difficult one to place.
So allow me to say up front, you're absolutely right. This is difficult. And it's different commenting on it than it is actually making those decisions. But there is very little evidence that going hard and going early actually does help. If that were the case, I can point to literally a dozen cases in New South Wales where we would have locked down the entire state for no reason whatsoever. Secondly, the Northern Beaches over Christmas and New Year demonstrated that it is possible to do these localised lockdowns for short periods of time and keep the rest of the country, indeed the rest of the city, free, and they were able to enjoy Christmas and New Year while we were locked down. Thirdly, what is becoming clear in New South Wales is that the lockdown in the eastern suburbs didn't work because of non-compliance. As soon as the New South Wales government made it very clear that this was a serious lockdown, and I think if Gladys had her time again, one thing she would have said differently right at the beginning is, this is a lockdown. We are locking you down because the spread is now in the community. Instead, she ummed and ahed around that, and I think it sent a signal for 2 weeks that allowed people to not comply with the health orders. What we have in Southwest Sydney at the moment, and it's clear, every single day we see it in the data, is we have too many people out in the community while infectious and not telling contract tracers where they were for the previous 2 weeks, which means at least half the cases or a third of the cases every day, the contact tracers can't actually track where the person was that created this situation. This is making their job incredibly difficult, if not impossible. And so the issue in New South Wales at the moment is not lockdown, is not contact tracing, is a lack of compliance. And that's the thing that should be focused on. I guess, Nick, if I can update my previous answer, that would be it.
Tamsin, let's go to what businesses can do, what's in their power to do. So could they, for instance, set up their own vaccine programs within the workplace, give staff the chance to have the vaccine of their choice, and then perhaps go to the government and say, well, look, we know everybody in this office or everybody in this building have the vaccine because we've ensured that they do, and if they haven't, they can't come to work. Can we open up? Do you think that might be one way forward, sort of enterprise by enterprise, if you like?
Look, if that could be done, I know that we've got, hundreds, if not thousands of members who would be lining up to be one of those businesses who would say, we'll make it possible, like they do with the flu vaccine, where they say, we'll bring in the nurse, we'll get it done. Multiple issues on this front. One, there's not enough vaccine supply. And the problem is, why should a Coles or Woolworths worker, for example, get it before your local RGA workers? Unfortunately, we need to do it in a manner where, frankly, as the government is currently doing it, where you do it by age group, you do it by most vulnerable. But once it has opened up to everyone, and I really hope maybe Jason can give us greater clarity on this, but I would hope by the end of the year, anyone who is eligible or who would want the vaccine can go and get the vaccine. At that point, I have no doubt the business will be eager and available to play the role of assisting anyone who wants to get the vaccine to get the vaccine. But I think one thing that we would really like to see is the vaccine conversation, frankly, amongst the media and amongst those who talk about lockdowns, move not from once we do get to higher rates of vaccination, that is, and I know that they've indicated in the paper today that Sydney might be there in 5 weeks' time. People are that eager to go and get the vaccine at the moment. But to have the conversation move from how many COVID cases we have to how many COVID hospitalizations we have. Because if we're continuing to run on how many COVID cases, once we hit that 60, 70% threshold, then we are never getting out of this. Because the important thing to know about the vaccine is it doesn't stop me transmitting the virus. It doesn't stop me transmitting it in the workplace. It doesn't stop me giving it to my family members. It just means that if I've got the vaccine, I probably won't be hospitalized, and it might just be more like a common cold or flu symptoms. So the problem is that unless we can move that conversation to people understanding that just because there are COVID cases, that's not the threshold that we should be looking at. We should be looking at how many people are having to go to hospital, how many are in ICU. And until the media and until the community get to that point, we are not going to get out of this horrible cycle where suddenly you see, like in Queensland, 5, 6 cases, and bang, they're locked down for 3 days, and they're saying it's probably not going to end now for another week. That's crazy, and that cycle won't end until we can help shift the conversation to a more reasonable one about who is actually going to hospital and dying of this disease rather than just who's getting it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Tamsin, but I do think there is one piece in there. We've been sort of pushing very heavily on rapid antigen testing because, there's a rate of vaccination which sort of goes like that, and there's a rate of, hospitalisation that is, does scare them that they might have too many people and we get bombarded. That said, I think we've got about 4,500 beds sitting around doing nothing, but let's put that to the side. But the benefit of rapid antigen testing allows businesses to be to a certain degree in control of what is going on from a COVID perspective in their environment. So, if you're one of the big four, Deloitte, PwC, etc., you should be able to have a medical professional on standby every day testing the team before they go into their offices. So we have to use these things that work very successfully globally inside this Australian market. It's crazy that we're not.
Yeah, I think Wimbledon was probably the perfect events example that used that, and that seemed to get pulled off without a hitch because they were testing everyone as they went into the stadiums to check that
It also provides an environment like I'm not against what Macron said in France. No vax, no anything. but it's pretty radical and it probably won't get up in Australia. I mean, that said, Disney globally have just said that there will be no staff who work for the Disney Corporation who are not fully vaccinated. So that's just a blanket employment requirement. But I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. But I do think that the rapid testing can fill this gap piece before we get people fully vaccinated and remain with environments that are inclusive, not exclusive.
Jason, how do you feel about that? The Macron route, basically compulsory vaccination in all but name.
Yeah, look, I'm not in favour of it, to be honest with everyone. I think that the rapid antigen tests, while it sounds good in theory, I mean, it still takes 15, 20 minutes to get a result. I'm not sure, but that technology is developing so quickly, it might change. But, you know, there is certainly, I think, the best way to handle this is to allow what Tamsin said, what Bruce I think is saying as well, which is as soon as everyone has had the opportunity to get vaccinated, and allow me to be clear, everyone should get vaccinated, then you will be, I think, in a situation where it is reasonable for us to say we should start to open up. Now, I don't think we should go the Boris Johnson way, which is just Freedom Day, let's see what happens. But I do think, but there's some interesting data out of that, which might actually suggest that Boris wasn't that far off. But the vaccination does massively reduce the data, somewhere between 70 and 90% of your capacity to actually infect someone. It obviously massively reduces your capacity to get sick from the virus. It massively reduces your ability to actually catch the virus. So, I mean, ultimately, this has to be a decision that adults make. And if you want to take the risk of not getting vaccinated, look, I disagree with your decision, but to bastardize Voltaire, I respect your right to make that decision. And so my view is that we will probably end up in a situation where you're going to have 60% of people vaccinated, 40% not, and we're just going to have to live with that. And that's not a great thing, but I think that's how democratic liberal societies have to live.
Okay, final round, everybody. I'll go to each in turn. What's the next step? What would your message be for the decision makers, the policy makers? What's the most important thing we do right now to start getting out of this quicker? Bruce?
I think from the Fed's perspective, there's still some marketing that could be really amped up. I mean, you couldn't have marketed any product more poorly. You know, they should be really non-stop ensuring that the vaccination marketing is providing confidence and a considered direction. We need mobile vaccination. We need priority premium paid vaccination by employers who want to, vaccinate their staff. We need priority for frontline workers who are not necessarily healthcare, i.e. hospitality workers. The super spreader employee also needs priority vaccination. But to Tamsin's point, we don't have them, but we need to amp that up no matter how. We have very good friends in the US and throughout Europe who have overload, and we should be calling on those to get them to Australia straight away. I think the rapid antigen testing piece provides a middle solution in between so that we can actually get smaller environments back, sectors where you can make sure that 100 people, all are COVID tested before we go in. I think there needs to be specific support to specific industries that are going to have a much slower comeback to this. I still think there should be pressure put on those industries who did not require their JobKeeper. There's about $1 billion out there to some pretty major moguls who seriously reported massive profitability and large executive bonuses, and that is almost just a disgrace. So I think some more pressure needs to go on there. There's still a load more to do, but and part of it actually is confidence and consistent messaging, and I don't think that's right either.
Jason?
Look, I think the federal government now has 4 phases to get out of this. My very strong view is somewhere around about the end of October, middle of November, every Australian who wants to get vaccinated will have had an opportunity to get vaccinated. I think we then need a 12-week staged process where we come out of that and we get to what Boris called Freedom Day. There are plenty of vaccines in Australia. There are plenty of if anyone who wants to get vaccinated can get vaccinated now. You may not be able to get Pfizer, but you can get AstraZeneca, the Australian-made AstraZeneca. And I think that when we get to the end of this, a lot of people, and especially the Labor Party, will have a lot to answer for here. Anthony Albanese still refuses to endorse the Australian-made AstraZeneca. They've just pre-selected in the seat of Higgins, Michelle Ananda Raja, who admitted on her own Twitter feed that she was part of an organised campaign to get Atagi to change their advice on multiple occasions that has created the vaccine hesitancy around it. And I frankly think, in the colloquial manner, that behaviour is absolutely criminal. To politicise a health pandemic for personal political gain, people will have to answer questions for that over and over. But I think that by the end of the year, we should be in a position where largely, not everywhere in the world, but if you are vaccinated, you should be able to travel freely around the world. We will be able to open venues again. We will be able to have a normal health system. And we can then start asking, I think, some very serious questions about the way that people behaved during this global pandemic.
Tamsin, Lawrence, you get the last word.
Wonderful. I'll keep it short and sweet, just three from me. So one similar to the comments of Bruce, but and to my earlier comments, when it comes to the vaccine, I think that business is ready, available and keen to assist in making sure that the rollout happens as quick and as efficient as possible. And the government, when it is available and possible to do so, should be reaching out the hand of assistance to them to make sure that they can play their part in making sure as many people as quickly as possible who wish to take up the vaccine do. Second, again, consistent with Bruce's comments, there is going to need to be a lot of targeted industry assistance and hand-holding in industries that you probably wouldn't have even thought of, that have had flow-on implications of this, of the various lockdowns. So I think that the government, the JobKeeper was good in a broad sense, but there was perhaps a bit too much wasted money, or money went into the wrong pockets. And I think that on the other side of this, we do need to look to make sure we're helping those who need it, and those who don't, that we get out of the way and just let them continue to do what they do. And my third point would just be to remind people that the impacts of this pandemic and the impacts on business owners, particularly the small and medium-sized business owners, will last with them for a very long time. And we shouldn't forget that. We shouldn't just say the pandemic's over, everyone's been vaccinated, these business owners are back to normal. A lot of these people, mortgaged their houses. They had the stress of perhaps, 10, 15 employees on their backs, thinking about the impact on them. And it's going to take a little while to give those people confidence. So continue to shop local, buy from your local cafe, buy from your coffee shop, shop Australian. I think that that would go a long way to helping these people get back on their feet and feel confident again to go out and hire more people and to expand their business at the other end of this.
Well, I think we've proved between us in the last 40 minutes that robust public policy discussion is essential business. We won't be stopping it. In fact, we'll be doing more of it during this pandemic crisis, and we'll be back with you regularly with these Watercooler Forum from Menzies Research Centre. You can support us, of course, by subscribing to the Menzies Research Centre for just $10 a month. Go to www.menziesrc.org/subscribe. And it just remains now to thank my guests. Thank you, Jason Falinski, Tamsin Lawrence and Bruce Keebaugh.
Thank you.